To an engineer, it's fairly obvious that an electric motor is a far superior machine to power a car than a petrol or diesel engine. But I'm not an engineer, so here to explain why this is the case, I have Eamon Stack and Matthew Seeley, two engineers who have written an article on this subject, which you can also find in the video description. Welcome, guys.
Good evening. How are we?
Great to be here. Thanks for having us, Ingi.
And thanks for coming. So to start off, we'll simply list the 10 reasons, and then we can discuss some of them in more detail. Matthew.
Yeah, so from what we put together, I suppose myself and Eamon sat down and we said we'd put the top 10 things we could think of. I'm sure we probably could have put more in there, but we said we'd limit ourselves to the depth we went. So we kind of said we had much greater efficiency, smaller size, no oil change and no, servicing from that perspective, little noise and vibration, no CO2 or pollution, no gears, a uniform power curve, little maintenance, a long lifespan, and local fuel being one of the things that kind of ties in with it all. And that's what we took to put into the article. So I suppose we can discuss the few bits and what was our thinking behind it.
Yes, I think you should expand on some of the reasons.
Yeah, so if we start with the first one, the greater efficiency, I mean, one of the highlights of an electric car is they're 80% efficient, more or less, using the energy that comes from electricity, whereas surprisingly, petrol and diesel engines are as low as 20% efficient. I mean, when they're new, you might get in a diesel engine over 40%, but it will deteriorate over time. And so the actual use of energy is very significant here in terms of the value of energy. It's just incredibly more efficient.
Okay.
I suppose with that, I suppose to say is the big thing is we don't see the advancements happening in, ICE engines at this point in time. It's not progressing any further where these big advancements are coming. So it kind of, in many ways, without any transition, we're starting to see limitations to what can be done with the internal combustion engine and how efficient it is. And a lot of what's happening is we're going to extremes with things, and it's, a lot more technology is needed to actually make them efficient, and it sometimes doesn't lead to more efficiency to make them cleaner as they come through. So, it does have an impact as to what goes on there. So it's a big change from what was there before. Efficiency is something that is critical, that, from a starting point, an EV really does start from a much better perspective. I suppose much smaller size to go into that, and I suppose the story I would say is I managed to blow up an engine in my car when I was 19, so I had to change it. And effectively, I've been there. I've had an engine out of a car. I've had an engine back into a car, and they're not small, they're not light. They take up a considerable bit of space, and the big thing we see with the size of an electric motor is how compact they can be. We really see, half the size in comparison to the main internal combustion engine in general speaking terms, in a normal petrol or diesel family wagon to what is a normal EV. And the biggest thing to me with that is form factor. So when we talk about where we can put these motors and what can be done, we're starting to see these frunks or fruits, depending on what you want to call it, where we have the space in the front of the car to put stuff in. The Ford F-150 Lightning is a perfect example from the US, where it's this big pickup truck that, the engine bay opens up, where you open it up and we have over 600 litres of boot space at the front of your vehicle now, where the engine used to be. And it's still got very similar performance to what was there previously, but this capability for what it can hold and how usable it is has been opened up just simply because the electric motors are so much smaller in comparison to what was there previously from the petrol or diesel engines. And another one, I sent it on to Eamon, we were having a chat about it one of the days, and I found an image of a truck engine that had been taken out and gearbox, and next to it on the ground they had an electric motor and gearbox that they were ready to put back into it. And it was frankly staggering, the difference. We most of us think of the size difference being in a car, but when you consider what's in a truck, the size of an engine in a truck to do the work it needs to do, and its equivalent EV compatriot, it's almost a tenth of the size. There's a massive difference between them. It's amazing the efficiency of size alone that comes with the motor.
And following on from that is the when you have a internal combustion engine, the inefficiency results, or where does the energy go? And it goes into heat, and so you have to add to the size of the engine a very significant cooling infrastructure. Whereas an electric car, you have no oil to cool it, and therefore you have no cooling system, and you have no oil changes and maintenance associated with that. And that is phenomenal. The number of moving parts in the electric car is much less. And so it's just a much simpler thing to maintain, and no oil filters, no service cycles. It is quite significant for the owner not to have to worry about these things.
And I suppose that kind of leads on in some way to the noise, vibration, and harshness as NVH as it is there in the industry. And I go back to my days of fixing and working on cars, and one of the big things you always found is in diesel engines in particular, they used to run a dual mass flywheel, and that was designed in such a way that it would take out the harshness of the diesel engine as it was idling. That was the big thing, as it sat there idling when you were stopped at the lights. And it had this dual mass flywheel to dampen the vibration that came from the engine and into the cabin. And effectively, they're expensive when they go wrong, and they do go wrong because they're a wearable part that comes out of it, and they're expensive. And you can't get away from the fact that you have this continuous turning mechanism that is in your vehicle when you're at idle, unless you have some very good stop start into it. And EVs have none of that. There's no harshness. You can see a motor that sits there, and as it spins, there's no kick, there's no turn. It doesn't have the same sort of I'd use the term, it has torque, but it doesn't have torque insofar as the engine itself is moving as it's operating. So it's extremely interesting that way as well when you look at them.
And then we're getting to halfway on our list is the obvious one. There's no CO2 emission out of an engine, and and other pollutants. So when you have diesel engines, you have nitrous oxide and other particulate matter. Like we have ignored this as a whole society, but the HSE tell us that 1,000 people die prematurely every year in Ireland because of pollutants, and therefore when you have so many cars and so many diesel vehicles in the city, you're essentially killing people. So the huge advantage of electric cars is that just don't have that, and it creates a greater future for us. But that's the thing people think most. But it's one of 10 reasons.
So I suppose the next one is no gears, and it's the one that I struggle with in some ways as a traditional petrol head, as I would classify myself as, and where I am at. However, I live in a city. I have to sit in day-to-day traffic that is a city, and I have to admit the life of changing gears, while enjoyable on a country road where I can enjoy it and use it to its benefit, does not suit me when I live in a city and I need to commute to work or go to drop the kids to school. This just singular gear, it's forward and reverse. There's nothing fancy to it. It's simplistic. It just makes life so much easier from that perspective. And it's one of the things I didn't think I would be looking forward to when I made it, switch from petrol and diesel to an EV. But it's one of the ones where I've kind of gone, actually, this is usable. That may be age as well, but it's come with time where I've gone, yeah, this is something that I can live with, and for the day-to-day, everything that I need to do, it's perfect. It's a fantastic thing, and just simple.
No clutch, no gear, so much easier to learn to drive. And your focus is on your driving, not on the mechanics in the car. And I suppose my personal view is, gears are a engineering compensation for an inadequacy of an internal combustion engine. They're a brilliant piece of engineering, but they're a compensation for the fact that the engine can't cope with high revolutions, and therefore it has to be geared down. So thank God they'll be gone. We don't need them. and to reverse an electric motor, of course, you just reverse the polarity of the current. You don't need a physical change.
But there are EVs
then,
with gears as well, like the Porsche Taycan, 2 gears, 4 gears.
yes. Yeah, no, it is possible, and you can get extra performance, especially on high performance cars. But for normal use cases, there's just absolutely no need for a gearbox. And conversions often leave the gearbox, but you only use second gear and reverse, as far as I know, because the electric motor has has a great range.
Well, I was going to say, to jump back to efficiency, Eamon, just to go back to that for a sec, when we talk about gears, the 2 gears, we'll say, Inge, as you would say there, is based on a mixture of performance and then efficiency. And typically you will find with the singular gear in your EVs, it's because that motor is so efficient, they don't have to gear it down to give you that efficiency at low speed to high speed comparison driving as you go between the two. So it is simpler. Yes, in many ways you could actually have a couple of gears in an EV and it would increase the efficiency again, but for most of the times it's such a small percentage that it really isn't necessary. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
And the next one is actually a direct follow-on from that. It's the uniform power curve coming out of an electric motor. So even I have an electric motorbike, and when I somebody with a bigger engine pulls up beside me, when we leave the traffic lights, they might get slightly ahead at the beginning, but because they have to change gears, I have a uniform curve, and I would just pass them out, from 0 to 60 fairly easily. And in terms of power performance, one interesting story and very embarrassing story is, a 100,000 pound Tesla Plaid is faster than a £1 million Ferrari or a Maserati, because simply the electric motors are more powerful. And the most powerful car in the world then is that Croatian car. I don't know, I forget the name of it, but its electric power is incredible.
It's the Rimac Nevera, I believe.
The Rimac 2. The Rimac 2, I think, is currently the fastest. Yeah, so it's just people just think of that. And the thing in the power curve, I was in an ID4, a Volkswagen ID4, towing a van, and realizing, God, because of that uniform power, it's so much easier to tow. You don't have this thing of constantly trying to sync your gears to deal with the extra load. The car just pulls it, and you can see videos of a Rivian pulling a full-sized Arctic out of a ditch last week, and it's just the power is incredible in electrics, and the uniform power across all speeds. So it's just better machine. And that's kind of what Matthew and myself are trying to communicate here. We forget sometimes that just the electric motor is just a better machine for doing what it needs to do.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm going to add to that insofar as I've come from the world of fast cars. I like my motorbikes as well, and when we look at EVs and how they drive, the thing I found, and the thing that I didn't, going back to the change from petrol and diesel to an EV, that really stood to me was there's a connection that we talk about in, connectivity when you're driving a car. As an enthusiast will always say how it feels to drive, the connectivity, what it feels like. This is the things they want out of their cars when they drive them. And actually, the connectivity between what your accelerator pedal does and what the car does is so instantaneous and so responsive in an EV. You don't quite realize it until you go back to a petrol or diesel car and you drive one, and all of a sudden you realize what you thought was quite good all of a sudden isn't quite as good as your electric car. And I hired a car last year for traveling up the country, and it was a petrol car with a 7-speed DSG box and a very good gearbox, a lovely car to drive. And all of a sudden I found myself realizing that it didn't respond the way I wanted it to, because when I put my foot on the accelerator pedal, it delayed, it waited to move. So that connection that I had built up in driving EVs, where it did what I wanted it to do when I wanted it to do it, was not there anymore. And all of a sudden I was kind of going, I should like, in some ways, to be in a petrol or diesel car for how they drive. But all of a sudden I'm driving an EV and I kind of go, actually, this is better. I prefer this. This has that connectivity that I'm looking for. which is really interesting. But and then the big thing, and we move on, little maintenance, as we mentioned on the list, is, you know, they are generally a lot cheaper to service and maintain. There's less to go wrong. My current EV is up for a service at the minute. It's 120 euros, I think, is what I was quoted to get it serviced for the first one. And, you know, 20,000 kilometers is when it's due on the clock. And I rang them up. I said, looking to get it serviced, what's in it? And they kind of went, well, we'll plug it into a computer, see if there's any software updates. We'll change the cabin filter, and we'll give it a look over. And I kind of went, and nothing else is really needed. And they were like, no, we should be all fine from there. And, you know, kind of that was it. And I kind of said, well, at 40,000, what will you do there? And they were like, well, we'll change the brake fluid. And that was it. You kind of sit there and kind of go, at 20 and 40,000 in a petrol diesel car, like, you could ring another dealership and they're like, well, it's an oil filter, it's oil, we'll change the filters, we'll put in this, we'll do that. It adds up in the maintenance, even at the early stages of a car when they're newer, and they tend to take less to be maintained. And then you get into older stuff, and as things get older, you know, we're seeing it with older lease, and particularly on the road that have been around for a long time, there's a lot less maintenance in them. They have known problems that are things that need to be done, but fundamentally they don't have issues and big expensive issues. Typically we don't see that in what we've seen in the community from you know, our time with EVs and what's gone on.
A good recent stat, 2 years ago, Hertz rental cars purchased 100,000 Tesla Model 3s, and that was sensational at the time. But now what's interesting is they've come back with the data on maintenance, and I think they're saying 70% less cost to them, and that's hugely significant to their business, and of course happier customers because and cheaper fuel. But it was the maintenance cost, you know, we see this now in data is proven. So that's, and then the ninth point, we're getting to the end here, is the lifespan. So, you know, partly the maintenance cost is cheaper and the lifespan is cheaper because, like, in a internal combustion engine, you have over 2,000 moving parts. And in an electric car, you might have the order of 25. You 100 times less moving parts, and therefore 100 times less things to break. And so, you know, we've had this tradition of what you call scrappage schemes after 10 years for internal combustion engine cars. There will be no question of scrapping an electric car after 10 years. You reasonably should expect 20 or 30-year lifespan. And in fact, there's a recent study of the Tesla Model 3 battery pack from Dalhousie University in Canada, and their latest paper was entitled "The 100-Year Battery Pack." That is, but there's no actual reason for the thing to fail. It's solid state. It's well maintained by its computers in terms of both the voltage and the thermal management. So they should last forever. So, you know, that's going to transform the automotive world totally. The cars last twice or three times as long as their internal combustion equivalent.
Yeah, and I suppose the last thing is to touch on is local fuel. You know, the big transition with EVs is in part around the environment, and it you know, you will always hear back that, well, they're not, you know, they're not CO2 negative, or they're neutral out of the tailpipe, but the CO2 is on the production on the upside of it. And you can say, yes, you know, as long as we burn gas, coal, whatever the case may be, there is a CO2 production for every bit of electricity we use. But the lovely thing about an EV and the transition that we're in now is we can get to a point where that doesn't exist at all. And we can't do that with petrol or diesel in what is the real world. And fundamentally, that local fuel is a great thing where people who have solar can put it in their home and you can charge your car. And, you know, in, I would say, unusual times, and hopefully things come back down when we look at the price of electricity, but when we are seeing such high prices of electricity at the minute, it shouldn't be the norm, but it should come back down. But for those that have solar and who have an EV, it really makes for cheap motoring in terms of a fuel cost. And, you know, some people get into it just from that in mind. They're not concerned with the environmental perspective, and that's fair enough. They just want cheaper motoring. And I think the big thing that will add to that is that local fuel. It's that ability that we're going from this big grid that is having to drive out, and petrol and diesel that is in our pumps that comes from, you know, lots of shipping before it even gets into your vehicle to be used. But now we're getting to the point where this local fuel is there. We can charge your car at home, and in effect, if you can maximize that, you really are getting to the point where your impact is very minimal when it comes to what you do when you drive an EV day to day. It's a big ability and a big benefit that comes with it.
And then the macro picture then from I mean, I'm not an economist, but from an economic perspective, not having to import all the fuel for transport is absolutely transformative. You know, it just in terms of our own economy, having our own source of energy is absolutely incredible. And for balance of payments and for vulnerability to the source and so on. So Ireland's really fortunate. We can easily power, you know, 2 million cars with our growing renewable energy, and it's going to be a very bright future for us.
I think that's a great note to end this video. Thank you both for coming today and joining me here. I hope everybody found this video, and thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.